It all began with a narrow stretch of dirt road, the kind you wouldn't think twice about unless you knew the value it held for those who relied on it. For nearly a decade, that road had served as a makeshift shortcut connecting two ends of Windy Pines Estates, a supposedly upscale gated community nestled behind an artificial lake and lined with pristine sidewalks, manicured hedges, and homeowners obsessed with uniform mailboxes and pet waste policies. That road, however, wasn't theirs. It was mine, a private strip of land I had inherited from my grandfather, an old rancher who bought up and used land when it was still cheap and before the neighborhood ever existed. It curved behind a hill, past a shallow creek, and connected my property to a main access road the HOA neighborhood flanked on both sides. Years ago, out of nothing more than small-town politeness, I'd allowed a few neighbors to use the road, especially during rainy seasons when their other entrance was flooded. It was a handshake agreement, nothing official, nothing promised. It was the kind of good deed that shouldn't bite you in the ass. But it did. The trouble came in the form of Karen Pennington, blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and an aura of entitlement so strong it could choke a horse. Karen had arrived at Windy Pines about 4 years ago and quickly ingratiated herself with the Homeowners Association. Before long, she was self-appointed vice president of Neighborhood Order, a title that didn't exist until she created it. She carried a clipboard like it was a badge, patrolled the sidewalks like a suburban sheriff, and made it her mission to uphold the covenant rules with a fervor that bordered on religious zeal. Unfortunately for me, she also took a particular interest in that dirt road. At first, she simply used it like everyone else. Then she started hinting at ways it could be improved. She'd stop by and say things like, with just a bit of pavement, this would make a wonderful access point. Or, wouldn't it be great if the city installed streetlights down here? I laughed her off the first few times, not realizing those casual comments were feelers for something bigger. The storm broke one humid Tuesday morning when I stepped outside and found a pair of city surveyors placing stakes along the edges of my road. When I asked what they were doing, they told me they were marking the path for proposed paving, based on a request filed by the Windy Pines HOA. My jaw damn near hit the dirt. Not only had they gone behind my back, but they'd also submitted paperwork suggesting that the road was under dispute or could qualify for city access due to community benefit. I kicked the surveyors off my land, drove straight to the county office, and spent 2 hours confirming my property boundaries and ownership. I had every deed, tax receipt, and legal document backing my claim. The road was mine, always had been. I made copies of everything and marched straight home. That night, I bolted into action. By sunrise the next day, a heavy-duty metal gate had been installed across the entrance of the road. I chose a commercial-grade model used by ranchers to keep out trespassers, complete with a keypad entry system and reinforced steel frame. I slapped a large reflective sign on it that read, "Private property, NO through traffic." Then, just for good measure, I put up a few cameras, motion-activated, cloud-backed, and pointed straight at the gate. I wasn't playing around. The backlash was instant. I didn't even get a full day of peace before the emails, letters, and calls started pouring in. HOA board members, most of whom I had never met, sent me long-winded messages citing everything from community unity to emergency response times. They claimed the road had become an essential route for neighborhood flow and that my actions were damaging the ecosystem of trust they had built. The audacity was laughable. I responded with a single paragraph attached to a PDF of my property deed, highlighting the legal boundaries and stating in plain terms that the road was not for public use. But Karen wasn't about to let it go. The very next evening, she showed up at my front porch, clipboard in hand and 2 HOA members in tow. She wore a pastel pantsuit like she was about to run for local office and had a condescending smile plastered across her face. "We're here to discuss the gate," she said, as if this was some kind of negotiation. I told her there was nothing to discuss. The road was mine, and it was no longer accessible to anyone but me. Her face stiffened, and her smile faltered. "You're being unreasonable," she said. "This affects dozens of families. You can't just cut us off." I stepped outside, shut the door behind me, and crossed my arms. "I didn't cut anyone off. You tried to steal something that didn't belong to you. Now I'm just taking back what's mine." Karen's jaw clenched. She turned to the man beside her, a weaselly fellow with nervous eyes. "This isn't over," she hissed before marching back to her golf cart convoy and peeling off down the road. That night, someone vandalized my mailbox. The words "selfish hermit" were spray-painted in neon green across it. It was childish and petty, but it was also a declaration of war. I took photos, filed a police report, and replaced the mailbox the next morning with a stainless steel, tamper-proof version that weighed more than a car tire and locked with a key. Let them try again. The air around Windy Pines grew thick with tension. Neighbors who once waved at me now averted their eyes. I caught more than a few residents slowing down near the gate, some taking pictures, others just glaring. Karen continued her crusade, spreading rumors that I was anti-community, a bitter recluse hoarding land for no reason. She conveniently left out the part where she tried to steal it. Meanwhile, I started digging through HOA documents and public records. What I found was a treasure trove of overreach, misfiled easement requests, and a history of the HOA pushing legal boundaries to expand their control. It became clear that this wasn't just about a road. It was about power. Karen and her board were used to getting their way through intimidation, manipulation, and bureaucratic pressure. I was the first real obstacle they couldn't push aside, and they hated it. But I wasn't going anywhere. I had the land, the law, and a righteous sense of justice on my side. So I tightened the screws. I installed floodlights around the gate perimeter. I built a gravel turnout so delivery trucks and lost drivers could turn around without trespassing. I even added a sign that said, "Not a public road, HOA not welcome." Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. Karen's flyers calling for community road restoration started appearing on telephone poles, but they got torn down just as fast. A few residents even came by quietly to thank me for standing up to her. Apparently, not everyone in Windy Pines was under her spell. Still, the war was far from over. Karen wasn't the type to back down quietly. She was brewing something legal, something public. I could feel it in the air every time I passed by the locked gate and saw new tire tracks skidding to a halt. But I was ready. She wanted a fight, she'd get one. And this time, she wouldn't be calling the shots. I was just getting started. Karen Pennington, it turned out, was far more tenacious than I gave her credit for. The moment I locked that gate and dared to enforce the boundaries of my own property, she transformed from a meddling HOA busybody into a full-blown crusader with a vendetta. Less than a week after our porch confrontation, I noticed a new wave of flyers stapled to every utility pole, tacked onto neighborhood bulletin boards, and even shoved under my windshield wipers when I parked in town. In bold capital letters, they screamed, "Local obstructionist threatens community safety. Is your family at risk?" Beneath that headline was a blurry, zoomed-in photo of me installing the gate, with text painting me as some bitter loner who had suddenly turned hostile after years of cooperation. The sheer audacity made my blood boil. The narrative she was pushing was simple and dangerous, that I was trying to hurt the community out of spite. She ignored the truth, conveniently skipping over the part where she tried to take my land without permission, and now she was working the neighborhood into a frenzy. It didn't take long for the ripple effects to hit. The kids who used to wave at me when I drove by on my tractor now turned their backs or, worse, cut across my front yard on their bikes, leaving tire tracks and taunting laughter in their wake. One even chucked an empty soda can at my fence. Adults weren't much better. A few neighbors who once nodded politely now avoided eye contact altogether. Others, bolder in their ignorance, openly glared or muttered under their breath when I passed. I heard words like selfish, antisocial, and even threat. It was surreal how quickly one woman's influence could turn a peaceful neighborhood into a petty war zone. Then came the letter, delivered via certified mail, complete with an officious HOA letterhead and Karen's signature scrawled at the bottom. It accused me of violating a so-called community easement that, according to her, had been historically used by residents and therefore was protected by some convoluted legal precedent. It was a cease and desist letter, couched in high-minded legalese but with no real weight behind it. I almost laughed. Almost. But this wasn't funny anymore. I drafted a polite but firm response, attaching copies of my property deed, the title history dating back nearly a century, and official zoning maps confirming the land had never been public. I sent it to both the HOA and the county clerk with a carbon copy to my attorney, just in case. Still, it didn't stop Karen. She didn't want facts. She wanted obedience. She wanted control. One rainy evening, as thunder rolled across the hills and I sipped my coffee on the porch, a motion alert pinged on my phone. I checked the live feed from my security cameras, and there she was. Karen, clad in a poncho, wielding bolt cutters. She had parked her golf cart just out of frame and was trying to break through the gate like a second-rate spy in a bad TV movie. I hit record, called the sheriff, and waited. By the time the deputy arrived, she was long gone, but the footage was crystal clear. Her face, her tools, her vandalism, it was all there. I handed over the recording and pressed charges. But nothing happened. Days passed. Weeks. The sheriff's department said they were looking into it, but no arrest was made, no citation issued. When I followed up, I was told there was insufficient evidence of criminal intent. I asked how much more intent they needed beyond her literally cutting through a private gate, but the response was just bureaucratic shrugs and passive apologies. Karen must have friends in low places, or perhaps the HOA had a few donors with pull at the county office. Whatever the reason, that lack of enforcement sent a message, and not a good one. Karen took it as a green light. The following weekend, I awoke to the sound of engines, dozens of them. When I looked out my window, I saw a convoy of SUVs, minivans, and golf carts lined up along the outer edge of my property. HOA members, many holding American flags and handmade signs, were staging what Karen dubbed the Freedom Drive, a full-on protest disguised as a community parade, complete with honking horns, blaring music, and chants of, "Open the road." They approached the gate, expecting some dramatic confrontation. What they got instead was a locked barrier and a "No Trespassing" sign in bold red letters. Some tried shaking the gate. Others shouted threats and slogans. One lady in a windbreaker threw eggs at the keypad. I stayed inside and called the sheriff. This time, when the deputies arrived, I met them at the property line and handed over more footage. I pressed charges for trespassing, naming every visible participant. That got their attention. But if Karen felt cornered, she didn't show it. Instead, she escalated further, launching a full-blown campaign of slander. She accused me of being a danger to public safety, of land hoarding, even of discriminating against HOA members due to personal prejudice. She went on local access television, her voice trembling with emotion as she told a story of being landlocked by a hostile neighbor, and warned viewers that unchecked power like his threatens the very soul of our community. I watched the broadcast with a bowl of popcorn and a rising tide of incredulous laughter. Was this woman serious? The next morning, the HOA website posted an open letter demanding an emergency town hall to discuss potential legal remedies and community strategies for reclaiming lost access. I wasn't about to let that slide. I contacted a lawyer, a good one. My cousin, actually. He specialized in property law and had a reputation for being both ruthless and meticulous. We went through every line of HOA bylaws, county ordinances, and state statutes. He drafted cease and desist letters of our own, targeting Karen personally for defamation and the HOA collectively for harassment. We also prepared a civil complaint detailing the incidents of trespass, vandalism, and coordinated harassment. The complaint was lengthy and well documented. And while it hadn't yet gone to court, just serving it sent a very loud and very clear message. Karen's momentum began to falter. Some of her most vocal supporters distanced themselves, either out of legal fear or simple embarrassment. The HOA board held closed meetings, no longer live-streamed, and rumors started to swirl that Karen's position was under review. Still, she didn't back down. She doubled down. She held driveway rallies and handed out pamphlets door-to-door painting me as a reclusive tyrant, barricading children from safe passage. She even tried to bait me by standing at the edge of my property line with a camera crew, narrating loudly about the injustice of the locked gate, hoping I'd snap and give her some viral footage. I didn't take the bait. But then she crossed a line that even her supporters couldn't stomach. She called 911. I found out from the deputy who came to my house, sheepishly holding his notepad as he recounted the complaint. Karen had claimed I was unlawfully detaining residents by locking the gate, preventing them from accessing a public throughway. According to the call transcript, she said people were trapped and that I had erected a barrier that endangered lives. When the deputy arrived and saw the quiet, locked gate and the wide-open main HOA road still functioning like normal, he looked genuinely annoyed. He said he had to respond to the call, but it was obvious there was no emergency. I showed him the gate logs, the property documents, and even pointed out the other 2 access roads into Windy Pines Estates. He left shaking his head, muttering something about wasting taxpayer money. But for me, that call was the turning point. Karen had gone from aggressive to dangerous. Weaponizing emergency services for a fake crisis was a whole new level of desperation. And now, she was no longer just annoying. She was criminal. My cousin filed a formal complaint with the county prosecutor's office, detailing the misuse of emergency services and referencing the prior instances of trespassing and harassment. And while I couldn't be sure if charges would stick, I knew one thing. The tide was turning. The neighborhood was growing weary. Karen's antics, once the stuff of suburban legend, were becoming liabilities. People were talking at HOA meetings, at bake sales, in hushed tones during evening walks. They were starting to see her not as a protector of community values, but as a power-drunk busybody dragging everyone into her personal war. The Freedom Drive fizzled. The rallies grew sparse. The flyers stopped appearing. And Karen, for the first time in months, looked nervous. As for me, I doubled down on peace. I landscaped around the gate, planted wildflowers, and put up a wooden sign that simply read, "Private property. Respect builds better neighborhoods." It wasn't a jab. It was a statement. And while I wasn't naive enough to think the battle was over, I knew I had weathered the worst of the storm. Karen could rant, protest, and call every number in the book, but she couldn't change the facts. The road was mine, and she couldn't bully me into giving it up. Not now. Not ever. By the time Karen called 911 because she couldn't get to her yoga class, the situation had long surpassed the boundaries of reason. The road closure I enacted on my own legally titled land had sparked resentment, gossip, and protests. But now, it had become an emergency in Karen's entitled world. I was working in my workshop, fixing a busted tractor part, when I saw the red and blue lights bounce off the walls of the barn. At first, I thought someone had driven off the road or there'd been a medical emergency nearby. But when I stepped outside and saw the deputy approach, not with urgency but with weary amusement, I had a strong feeling I knew exactly who was behind the visit. Sure enough, the officer sighed and said, "You must be Mr. McAllister. I'm here because a local resident, Karen Pennington, called in reporting unlawful detainment and obstruction of public access." His voice was measured, but his face couldn't hide the absurdity of the complaint. I nodded, wiped my hands on a rag, and invited him over to my front porch. We sat down and I handed him a folder. Inside, my property deed, easement maps, copies of communications with the HOA, and the letter from the zoning commission confirming the gate was on private property. The deputy flipped through it, nodding and taking notes. He radioed dispatch and, with professional finality, announced the road as private access only, closing any potential confusion for future calls. "Sorry for the trouble," he said, standing to leave. "She's been persistent, but this clears it up. We'll note it in the system." I thanked him and watched his cruiser pull away, hopeful that the nonsense would now end. But Karen wasn't someone who accepted boundaries, not emotional, legal, or literal. That very evening, I spotted her down by the gate with her phone on a selfie stick, broadcasting herself live to her HOA Facebook group. Her shrill voice echoed up the hill. "This is a human rights violation. I am being denied the basic right to travel. This is how dictatorships begin, by locking gates and silencing communities." She pounded on the gate with both fists, rattled it theatrically, and stared into the camera as though she were trapped in a war zone rather than standing on a manicured suburban road. Her antics were so ridiculous I couldn't help but laugh, but I also hit record on my own security system. Karen's tantrum went viral in local circles, especially after someone overlaid it with dramatic music and slow-motion captions. I thought the embarrassment might finally silence her. I was wrong. Within a week, she launched a GoFundMe campaign titled, "Reclaim Our Road." The description claimed the neighborhood was under siege, residents were being held hostage, and she was fighting for the safety and freedom of her community. I scrolled through the page with disbelief as I read claims that I was a radical loner with a vendetta against progress, and that the gate was a deliberate trap to endanger emergency service. Karen raised over $3,000 in a week, enough to embolden her to hire a scrappy local attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. That's when I got the letter. A formal complaint alleging I had violated a community easement, endangered residents, and committed civil obstruction. My cousin, Will, who happened to be a seasoned property attorney, reviewed it and nearly spit out his coffee from laughter. "She's trying to sue you for protecting your own land?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "That's bold, even for an HOA Karen." He immediately began drafting a countersuit for harassment, intentional defamation, and multiple counts of trespassing. He also added a complaint against the HOA for inciting community action without legal standing. This wasn't just a feud anymore. It was turning into a full-on court case. As Will prepared our filings, I received notice that the zoning board had agreed to hold a hearing. Karen, through her HOA title, had requested the board review the gate and determine whether it infringed on any public access rights. I welcomed the hearing, finally, a chance to put everything out in the open. On the day of the session, the meeting room buzzed with tension. Half the HOA board showed up, along with a few dozen residents. Karen sat front and center, draped in a shawl and sipping from a reusable water bottle printed with "Justice for Windy Pines." She opened her speech with a quiver in her voice, claiming she represented the silenced families who just wanted to drive safely, alleging children were forced to walk miles in unsafe conditions due to my gate. I leaned forward as she spoke, jaw clenched. When it was my turn, I stood, thanked the board, and presented a bound folder of evidence. Maps showing the original lot line from the county archives, aerial photos, the recent sheriff report, and a letter from the fire chief stating there were no access concerns. Will spoke next, eviscerating Karen's claim with surgical precision. He quoted state law, zoning codes. I had to act fast. Will contacted the blog and demanded a retraction, threatening a defamation suit. He also filed a cease and desist against Karen for her ongoing smear campaign. But what mattered more was the response. Comments on the blog overwhelmingly sided with me. Readers pointed out the legal records, debunked Karen's claims, and questioned the journalist's credibility. The smear attempt backfired spectacularly. Karen, once a neighborhood heroine, had become a laughingstock. Her own HOA board turned against her, issuing a statement disavowing her actions and acknowledging my legal rights. Weeks passed. The gate remained standing. The road was quiet. Children resumed playing, residents stopped glaring, and even the mailman gave me a thumbs up. Karen, facing mounting pressure and legal exposure, quietly resigned from her HOA post. Rumors swirled that she was moving to Florida to be closer to her sister. I couldn't confirm it, but I wouldn't be surprised. With the ordeal behind me, for now I finally had peace. I took time to repair what had been damaged. My land, my reputation, and my sense of trust in the neighborhood. I planted new trees near the gate, added a security camera with a comical scarecrow beside it, and placed a modest sign that read, "Respect property, respect peace." I knew that people like Karen don't disappear. They relocate, regroup, and rear up in new forms. But I also knew I was stronger now. I had the truth, the law, and a solid steel gate. And if anyone tried to take what was mine again, they'd find me ready, not just with documents and defenses, but with resolve forged from surviving the storm Karen brought. And Karen? Well, the last I heard, she was suing her yoga instructor for emotional damages. Some things never change. By the time the smoke from the legal battle had cleared, it was clear that the war was not just about a gate or a shortcut road. It had been about power, respect, and finally drawing the line against entitlement. With the law firmly on my side and the HOA now bearing the weight of their own poor decisions, I saw an opportunity, Not to gloat, not to exact revenge, but to reinforce what I had been saying from the very beginning. This was my land, and my land would be treated with respect. I wasn't going to just let things settle. I would make it known that this land wasn't some communal hallway the neighborhood could traipse through at will. It was mine, bought and paid for, and I wasn't backing down ever again. The first thing I did was overhaul the gate. I wasn't taking any more chances. It had served its purpose thus far. Kept trespassers out, won in court, and become something of a symbol, but now it needed an upgrade. I contracted a local welding shop to reinforce the structure with weather-resistant steel, installed gravel paving to prevent wear, and had a new security system fitted. This wasn't just a gate anymore. It was a declaration. I added motion-activated lights that lit up the entire entrance at night, a high-definition camera mounted to a pole, and, most satisfyingly, a recorded message that played any time someone approached within 10 feet. Warning: you are entering private property. Unauthorized access is prohibited. Turn around immediately. To complete the effect, I landscaped the area, clean gravel paths lined with sturdy native shrubs, a fresh wooden fence with a protective seal, and even a couple of American flags to remind folks this wasn't just about property lines. It was about individual rights. The final touch. A solar-powered sign that lit up at dusk, etched with bold capital letters: private property, no public access. Trespassers will be prosecuted. And wouldn't you know it, just as I finished tightening the last bolt, Karen showed up one more time. This time she came with a news crew in tow. Local affiliate vans with shiny cameras and eager young reporters ready to catch whatever drama she'd promised them. She was dressed in full suburban warrior attire. Oversized sunglasses, a windbreaker in HOA blue, and a clipboard clutched like it contained constitutional amendments. I watched from my porch as she walked dramatically up to the gate, waved to the cameras, and proclaimed, "I am standing here today to demand justice for our community. This gate is a symbol of tyranny. Our children are being forced to detour around miles of unsafe terrain." And I cut her off from the porch by hitting a button. The security system speakers blared the automated message, and Karen jumped, startled. The cameras caught the whole thing. Her flinching, stumbling back, and trying to compose herself while the robotic voice warned her she was trespassing. The reporters looked uncertain. I walked down calmly with a flash drive in hand. "Would you folks like the full footage?" I asked, because I've got hours of Karen here cutting locks, yelling at deputies, and even trying to drive her car through my fence. I handed it over with a smile. The news story that aired that night wasn't the piece Karen had envisioned. Instead of a sympathetic rallying cry, it was a highlight reel of her greatest hits. Every tantrum, every illegal move, every over-the-top accusation laid bare for the world to see. The best part? They aired a side-by-side comparison. Her ranting about being trapped while the footage showed her clearly walking freely, gesturing to the gate, even smiling between takes. She'd scripted it all, and now it had unraveled. The fallout was swift. Residents who had once tolerated her saw her for what she was, a control-obsessed manipulator who had turned their peaceful neighborhood into a national embarrassment. The HOA board began to crumble. One by one, members resigned, citing exhaustion, legal concerns, and mounting homeowner backlash. One elderly couple even came to my property to apologize in person. "We didn't realize how far she'd taken things," they said, offering me homemade peach pie as a peace offering. Then came the big announcement. Karen had been voted out as HOA president in an emergency meeting. Her replacement, a middle-aged father of 3 named Paul, pragmatic, friendly, and, most importantly, sane. He came by my property the week after his appointment, shook my hand and said, "I just want to start over. You were right. The board overstepped. I'll make sure it never happens again." He even offered to share the HOA's new code of conduct, which explicitly forbade any future attempts to use private land for community access without formal negotiation. I took the paper, nodded, and for the first time in months, felt like I could breathe easy. With peace restored and Karen politically exiled, the neighborhood underwent a quiet transformation. People stopped using my road. The shortcut faded from GPS. A few homeowners actually sent me thank you cards for standing up for what was right. I started getting invited to neighborhood barbecues and even got a couple of friendly waves from folks who used to glare at me through their windshields. Karen, for her part, didn't go quietly. Rumor had it she tried starting a recall against Paul but couldn't get enough signatures. She filed a complaint with the state HOA registry, but it was dismissed. Eventually, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. 2 months later, she was gone. No farewell posts, no parties, just an empty house and a listing price slashed twice before a buyer finally moved in. Someone told me she'd relocated to a nearby subdivision. One with no existing HOA but where she was already canvassing to start one. I felt bad for those poor souls. As for me, life returned to normal. Better than normal. I built a new mailbox, one shaped like a tiny version of my gate, complete with a working mini-lock. A joke gift from Paul, actually. It came with a plaque that read, Private Landowner of the Year. At first, I thought it was silly, but over time, it became a symbol. Not of stubbornness, but of standing firm when it counted. Of not letting bullies redefine your rights. Of the quiet, proud strength of saying, enough. I planted a garden beside the gate, wildflowers, berry bushes, even a small bench for visitors who came by to say hello. The land that had been a battleground now bloomed. Kids from the neighborhood would ride their bikes up to the edge, wave, and turn back around like they were supposed to. One even left a chalk drawing that read, Nice gate, Mr. M. I smiled every time I saw it. Sometimes I'd catch myself standing by the gate, looking out at the road that had caused so much chaos. But there was no bitterness anymore, just peace and the satisfaction of knowing I had done the right thing. Karen's tyranny had collapsed, not because I fought dirty, but because I held the line with truth, law, and persistence.